Hey everyone, and welcome to my Factorio Belt Based Big Base, as I call it. I wouldn't say it qualifies as a mega base, but the parameter that I originally began with was if you shove 4 speed module 3s in a tier 3 assembling machine, that gives you a speed of 3.75. So I built the whole thing based on producing and consuming 3.75 science packs per second. Now, I was originally going to do an actual walking and train tour, but my frame rate is just total shit, so I'm going to use the radar instead to make this go easier. So, starting with power production, I went for a 4-reactor setup with 48 heat exchangers and turbines, and then some steam on the side for extra storage in the tanks. So, for the uranium processing, I wasn't too good with circuit networks, so I decided to come up with this sort of brute force method of having a circular carousel for U-238 and then having the 235 go on the other side of the belt in a circle, and then having the Covarex process directly hooked up to the fuel cell maker, and then having a closed loop right here for the extra 235 to cycle around, and then have the provider chest there if I needed to request 235 to make atomic bombs. And then obviously have a provider chest for 238 to make uranium ammo. So, a couple other things. I went for a... part of the things with the base is I wanted to have it be belt-based, so minimal bot usage as well as not using electric furnaces. So, pretty typical belt-based mining outpost here. Nothing too special about it. But one of the things I did was if there was a coal deposit occurring near an ore deposit, then I would do on-site smelting and load the plates directly into trains. So if I go over now to the main ore inputs, so I got the 4-lane system here, left-hand drive, and then there's branch lines that come off where the trains run in a single direction, and then they branch off to their various stations. And I didn't build any stackers because I think the with the traffic levels I have, the design here is the way this is signaled. It should work that if a train is, if this station is, so like if this station's occupied, and a train's trying to get, second train's trying to get to it, it'll wait here, and then if any more trains come, they'll branch off and bypass around it. So I haven't hit traffic levels where it's a problem here yet, but that's how I do the stations and the ore inputs. So my smelter lines are pretty typical half-belt splitter design with blue belts and 70 steel furnaces. The steel smelter design I got off the internet somewhere, but I decided to make it tile more nicely and scale up nicely and be more space optimized. I had it take in two full blue belts of ore, and then output slightly more than 2 yellow belts of steel. So I got all that going on, and then a bit of miscellaneous things here. This is where I got the stone being smelted into bricks, and then concrete walls and hazard concrete produced, and then I got a belt of stone and a belt of bricks going over to other production to make electric furnaces and landfill. Oil processing, I went with the 25-3-21 cracking ratios and then put speed modules in all the buildings. So, simple circuit stuff. This pump doesn't turn on until that tank is full enough. And then later in the game, once I figured out the design, I decided to do some coal liquefaction as well. So, same ratios, but I decided to make my coal liquefaction build also take in the proper amount of coal to feed itself with steam as well. And then I got them piped together in the same system. So then, for example, over here, I fuel all my furnaces and my trains with rocket fuel, so I siphon away a ton of white oil, and this giant monster here puts out about 1 yellow belt of rocket fuel, if needed. Plastics, if you put production modules in, you can produce two blue belts of plastic off of 1 blue belt of coal, so that's what I got going on here. going over to my advanced circuit factories. So a couple things, starting with the basics. Gear production here, 2 blue belts to 1 blue belt. And then circuit production, things were a bit interesting because when I did the math on outputting blue belts of circuits with productivity modules, each of these blue belt lines was consuming about 30 units of copper and iron per second each. So that wasn't a nice even ratio, but I figured out that if I made 8 of these production lines and fed them with 6 belts of copper and iron each, the math would work out nicely. So I had to do a bit of belt trickery with splitting off portions of the blue belt into a yellow belt and then recombining, different capacity belts further down the line to balance out the rates correctly. So for my setup here, I needed about 4 of these giant green circuit factories, and then they all converge on this belt highway here, and then some of them split off to the make everything area, the science production, and then I got processing units, and then a whole bunch of them go over to advanced circuits. So I should have thought this through because it doubles the amount of belts, but you have same deal as the plastic. You got 1 blue belt of copper making 2 blue belts of cables, and then I got 20 blue belts of cables running up here to advanced circuitry. I wasn't too experienced with beacons yet, so this is kind of more limited use, but next time I build a mega base, I'm definitely going to do productivity modules and then beam in a bunch more speed. But advanced circuit balances out nicely. You come to, if you want to output 20 advanced circuits a second, you need to put in 40 cable and 20 of each of the, you need to put in 80 cable and then 40 each of the plastic and green circuits. So then I got 10 of these layouts here all converging on this. And then definitely should have had more module production going on because the amount of productivity modules in the mining drills is just downright ridiculous. But it's not a perfect ratio, but doing it in this 4x4 pattern here seems to balance out pretty nicely, and I think it kind of looks cool. So then the advanced circuits and the green guys go here into the processing unit factories. And then, the other thing is, so with the on-site smelting, I built a secondary complex of train stations to offload plates. And so I got these plate stations snaking underneath the other belt highways, and then over by circuit production, I join them into the lines coming off the smelters with splitters. So that way, if my ore deposits run out from just ore, but the plate deposits don't run out, then everything stays running and I never have a interruption in production. So then a couple other things. This was my produce everything spaghetti area, where I just input the basic needs and have this maze of belts and make everything you need. And then this is the central science production area. So over here is where I have all the belts being input. So this thing was a doozy. I think this thing took me like 15 hours of trial and error and planning design to get it right. So not only did I make the science here, but batteries and engines aren't used for too many things outside of science. So I decided to also throw in my robot production, trains, and laser turrets and accumulators here as well, so I wouldn't have to belt the batteries and engines to any other part of the factory. So that's the core of the science production there. So the now some of the capacities here are a bit excessive, but I designed the science thing that the inputs would be able to sustain this thing if all the science packs are being produced at full capacity, as well as robots, accumulators, and turrets at the same time. And then I got a secondary thing for pumps here, and then I didn't put it in this base, but I modified the design here to produce flamethrower turrets because I found out those things are extremely powerful against biters. So then over here I got the rocket production area. So fairly simple also. Light oil to solid fuel, and then belting in all the ingredients, and then running them down the line, and then putting them in the rocket silo. So the rocket silo, I just configured this whole setup so it would produce the equivalent of 3.75 space science packs a second, and then a simple circuit setup to not insert the satellite until the chest contents of here drop below a certain threshold. And then a couple other things. Made a bit of a mistake when I made this factory of not doing isolated logistics networks. So I got this massive central complex here. And then I ran roboports out to everything. So build times are kind of ridiculous. So I think next I'm going to go for a 1 rocket per minute factory, but do a couple tweaks like go beltless and have isolated networks with bot-based transportation, isolated networks, as well as having double-header trains and reduction of loops for train pathing. So we'll see how that turns out. But yeah, I think it's all right. Took me 200 hours to get this far, so we'll see how the next run goes and see how building something 4.5 times bigger than this is.